Two men walked into one of America's most prestigious museums. They didn't smash a window. They didn't fire a single shot. They didn't even hide their faces. Instead, they wore something far more convincing: Boston police uniforms. What happened over the next 81 minutes would become the greatest unsolved art theft in history. 13 priceless masterpieces disappeared into the darkness. Masterpieces by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Manet, Degas. Together, they were worth more than $500 million. Yet, the thieves seemed to vanish as completely as the paintings themselves. For more than 3 decades, the FBI, Interpol, and some of the world's best art investigators have chased whispers, dead ends, and men who carried dangerous secrets to their graves. No arrests, no recovered masterpieces, no definitive answers. And perhaps the most haunting detail of all, the empty frames still hang inside the museum today, waiting, almost as if they're expecting the paintings to come home. But after all these years, what if they never will? To understand how a crime this extraordinary could happen, you first have to understand the place where it happened. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum isn't like the Louvre. It isn't like the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was never designed to be simply another museum. It was a deeply personal creation, a living work of art. Built at the beginning of the 20th century, the Venetian-style palace surrounds a breathtaking indoor courtyard overflowing with flowers, ancient sculptures, and centuries of history. Every hallway tells a story. Every room reflects the vision of one remarkable woman. Visitors often describe the museum as peaceful, timeless, almost sacred. But on the night of March 18, 1990, that beauty concealed a dangerous weakness. Behind its elegant walls, security had failed to keep pace with the value of what it protected. The technology was outdated, the procedures were vulnerable, and perhaps most critically, only 2 young night watchmen stood between some of humanity's greatest artistic treasures and anyone bold enough to take them. Outside, Boston was unusually quiet. It was St. Patrick's Day weekend. Most of the city had already celebrated. The streets had emptied. A cold March mist drifted through the Fenway neighborhood as midnight gave way to the early hours of the morning. Inside the museum, everything appeared perfectly normal. The watchmen believed the thick stone walls made the building safe, but someone else already knew better. Someone had been waiting for this exact moment, and in just a few minutes, there would be no turning back. When people talk about the Gardner Museum heist, they usually focus on the stolen paintings. But the greatest victim wasn't a building, it wasn't an insurance company, and it certainly wasn't money. It was the lifelong dream of one extraordinary woman, Isabella Stewart Gardner. Born into enormous wealth, Isabella refused to live by the rigid expectations of Boston's high society. She traveled the world, collected breathtaking works of art, and filled her home with objects that inspired wonder. But behind her adventurous spirit was profound personal tragedy. After losing her only child to illness, Isabella poured her grief into a new purpose. If she couldn't preserve the life she had lost, she would preserve beauty instead. Over decades, she assembled one of the most remarkable private art collections ever created. When Isabella died in 1924, she left behind something unusual. Her will contained one uncompromising condition: nothing inside the museum could ever be permanently changed. No painting could be moved. No sculpture could be relocated. No room could be rearranged. If anyone violated those instructions, the museum and its entire fortune would be transferred to Harvard University. It wasn't simply a legal document. It was her final wish, a promise that every visitor, for generations to come, would experience the collection exactly as she intended. Then, 66 years later, Two thieves ignored that promise. They didn't simply steal priceless masterpieces, they tore through history itself, and with every slash of a knife through centuries-old canvas, they destroyed something that could never truly be replaced. Because what happened next wasn't just a robbery, it was the beginning of a mystery that still refuses to die. It's St. Patrick's Day weekend. Hours earlier, Boston streets had been overflowing with celebration. Bars were packed. Music echoed through the city. Police were stretched thin, responding to drunken fights and late-night disturbances. But by 1:24 a.m., the crowds were gone. The city had fallen silent. Inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, only two young night watchmen remained on duty. They had no idea they were about to become part of history. A buzzer suddenly shattered the silence. At the museum's employee entrance stood two Boston police officers. On the security monitor, nothing seemed unusual. Uniforms, badges, authority. They calmly explained they were investigating reports of a disturbance in the museum's courtyard. For Rick Abbott, a 23-year-old self-described hippie working the overnight shift, it sounded routine, but the museum had one simple rule: never open the door to anyone after hours, not even the police. Abbott made a decision that would be questioned for decades. He unlocked the door, and with that single click, history changed forever. The officers stepped inside with complete confidence. There was no rush, no panic, no sign that anything was out of the ordinary. Then one of them looked directly at Abbott. "You look familiar," he said. "I think there's a warrant out for your arrest." Confused, Abbott tried to make sense of what he was hearing. The officers instructed him to step away from the panic button, to turn around. Seconds later, cold steel handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. Still believing this was some terrible mistake, Abbott asked why he was being arrested. One of the men leaned closer. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "You're not being arrested. This is a robbery." In that instant, every illusion disappeared. The second night watchman was quickly overpowered. Both men were marched into the museum's basement. Their eyes were covered. Their hands and feet were wrapped tightly with duct tape. They were bound from eyes to ankles and secured to iron pipes, completely helpless, completely isolated. Above them, the museum belonged to the thieves. For the next 81 minutes, they moved through the galleries without interruption. No alarms forced them to flee. No police officers burst through the doors. No one came to stop them. They walked from room to room with eerie patience, as if they already knew exactly where they were going, or perhaps exactly what they were looking for. But this is where the mystery becomes even stranger. If the thieves came for money, their choices made very little sense. They ignored Titian's Rape of Europa, widely considered the most valuable painting in the museum. Instead, they approached Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the master's only known seascape. Rather than carefully removing it, they slashed the canvas from its frame. The violent tearing of centuries-old fabric echoed through the silent galleries. It was an act investigators would later describe as both brutal and baffling. They stole Vermeer's The Concert, one of only 34 known works by the Dutch master. They removed several Degas sketches. They took a Napoleonic finial, including a tiny finial eagle. Each selection raised more questions than answers. Some priceless works were left untouched. Others, seemingly less valuable, disappeared forever. It wasn't the pattern of ordinary thieves. It was the pattern of someone following a plan that no one else understood. At 2:45 a.m., the thieves were finished. They calmly walked back through the same entrance they had used to enter. No frantic escape, no speeding getaway. They simply disappeared into the cold Boston night. And perhaps the most astonishing detail of all, too, the museum's alarms never sounded outside the building. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the thieves were gone, the paintings were gone, and the trail had already begun to fade. But what investigators would discover only hours later would make the mystery even more impossible to explain. When the morning shift arrives at 8:15 a.m., they find a horror movie scene. Shattered glass covers the floor. Masterpieces worth fortunes are gone, replaced by jagged, empty wooden borders. The FBI steps in immediately. They quickly realize the thieves left behind almost zero physical evidence. No hair, no fibers, no usable fingerprints. But they did leave behind something else, the museum's motion detector logs. When agents analyze the printouts, they discover a baffling anomaly. The motion sensors recorded the movements of the thieves throughout the rooms, but they never registered any movement in the room where Manet's Cher Tortoni was stolen. Yet, the painting was gone. Even more suspicious, the logs showed that just minutes before the thieves rang the doorbell, Rick Abath had opened and closed the side door during his early patrol round. Was it a signal to the thieves or a tragic coincidence? Abath is interrogated repeatedly, but he passes every polygraph test. The trail instantly goes cold. As the months turn into years, the FBI turns its sights toward the dark underbelly of the New England underworld. In the 1990s, Boston is a battleground for organized crime. Two main theories emerge, each more dangerous than the last. The Carmelo Merlino theory. The first major suspect was Carmelo Merlino, a mob associate who operated a seemingly ordinary auto repair shop. To outsider, it looked like just another neighborhood business, but investigators believed it was much more than that. Informants began coming forward with explosive claims. According to several sources, members of Merlino crew privately boasted about having access to the stolen paintings, not because they admired the artwork, not because they intended to sell it, but because masterpieces worth hundreds of millions of dollars could become the ultimate bargaining chip. The theory was chilling. If members of the crew were ever arrested for unrelated crimes, the paintings could be traded back to authorities in exchange for reduced prison sentences. A priceless insurance policy, a criminal's version of a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was a theory investigators couldn't ignore, but there was one enormous problem. No paintings were ever recovered. No direct evidence ever connected Merlino to the robbery. Only rumors, whispers, and informants whose credibility was often impossible to verify. The case remained frustratingly out of reach, but another suspect would soon emerge, one whose story was even darker. The second theory centers around a legendary Boston criminal named Bobby Donati. Donati was an art thief with ties to the Patriarca crime family. Then investigators learned something that immediately captured their attention. Shortly before the Gardner Museum robbery, Donati reportedly visited a local mobster in jail. According to witnesses, he told the imprisoned gangster he was about to pull off something enormous, something big enough to secure his release. Was the Gardner heist the operation he had been talking about? Had one of history's greatest art thefts been planned not for profit, but as leverage? It was entirely possible. But if Bobby Donati truly knew where the paintings went, he never had the chance to tell anyone. Just over a year after the robbery, Boston's violent mob war claimed another victim. Bobby Donati was found murdered in the trunk of a car. His throat had been cut. It was a brutal execution, one that permanently silenced one of the investigation's most intriguing figures. If Donati possessed the answers, he carried them to his grave. And with his death, the Gardner mystery became even harder to solve. Years passed, witnesses disappeared, informants changed their stories. Suspects died, evidence grew colder. The investigation seemed trapped in an endless cycle of promising leads that collapsed just before revealing the truth. Yet, despite decades of frustration, the FBI refused to give up, because somewhere, someone still knew where those 13 masterpieces had gone. The only question was whether they were willing, or still alive, to tell the world. Decades have passed. Tips have poured in from all over the globe, from Paris to Dublin to remote islands. The FBI has dug up backyards, raided mob safe houses, and offered a staggering $10 million reward for information leading to their safe return. In 2013, the FBI made a stunning announcement. They claimed they knew who did it. They stated with high confidence that the thieves belonged to a mid-Atlantic criminal organization. But they added a devastating twist. Both men were already dead. Because the statute of limitations for the theft expired in 1995, no one can ever be prosecuted for stealing the art. The only focus now is recovery. Yet, despite immunity offers and millions on the table, the paintings remain ghosts. Are they sitting in a climate-controlled vault of a wealthy, corrupt billionaire? Or did they rot away in a damp New England basement years ago? If you walk into the Dutch room of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum today, you will notice something deeply profound. The frames are still there. Per Isabella's strict will, they cannot be filled with other art. They hang there as gilded headstones, marking the exact spots where human genius once lived. They are a permanent reminder of what we lost on that cold March night. $500 million in value, but entirely priceless to human history. The world still waits for the day these frames are filled once again. But with every passing year, the hope grows dimmer. The canvas fades, the witnesses die, and the greatest art mystery in history remains completely unsolved. Do you believe the Gardner masterpieces are still intact, waiting to be found? Or are they gone forever? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If this deep dive into history's most mysterious heist kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We break down the world's most baffling cold cases and true crime mysteries weekly. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next investigation.